Welcome back to The Explainer. So, if you're the kind of person who loves digging into stories that, actively test the very limits of reality, you are in for an absolute treat today. We're putting a magnifying glass to a text that one of our sources affectionately described as an existential crisis wrapped in a trench coat. Literally, we're looking at this deeply unhinged, brilliantly multi-layered manuscript called The Devil's Ledger and Instructions for Forgetting. It's a wild ride that completely deconstructs itself as you read it. So grab your coffee and get focused, because we are about to unpack a literary puzzle that actively fights its own existence. Now, since this source material is completely obsessed with bureaucracy and textual organization, we are going to set up a really rigid structure for ourselves before we watch the narrative completely self-destruct. Our sections for today: a literary autopsy, noir meets the devil, the anti-narrative countertext, and finally, the beautiful residue. Let's jump in. Section 1. A literary autopsy. Examining the duality. Okay, so get this. The creators of this manuscript, who our sources refer to as Max and Claude, they couldn't just, write a book together like normal people. No, they had to construct this massive duality mythology by creating two totally distinct alter egos. On one side, we've got Penix MBRS. That's the author credited with writing the straightforward, hard-boiled noir thriller half. And on the flip side, Anti-Penix LVR. This is the author of the shadow text, the half of the book that actively doubts, criticizes, and just dismantles the very thriller the first guy just built. It's wild. They built a book about the instability of identity and proved it by literally refusing to use their real names on the title page. The critical sources analyzing this text really pull no punches, and honestly, this affectionately sums up the whole vibe perfectly. One source points out that this isn't just a book. It's a manuscript where one half is basically Raymond Chandler doing a line of coke with Mikhail Bulgakov, and the other half is the ensuing bad trip arguing that narrative itself is a mistake. Quote, "This is schizophrenia with excellent prose." It's beautifully, magnificently at war with itself, right? It constantly builds up this thrilling narrative and then immediately goes, hey, look how fake and constructed all of this is. All right, Section 2, Noir meets the Devil, the thesis. So in this first half, the noir thriller, we dive right into Los Angeles, the Broadberry building, and a private investigator named James Carter. But instead of your typical mobster strolling into his office, it's the devil. And I love this detail from our sources. The devil, whose name is Wooland, walks in wearing a cream-colored suit, and his teeth are perfect. Carter, being this world-weary detective, just casually notes that nobody in Los Angeles has perfect teeth unless they're from somewhere else entirely. This version of the devil, he acts way less like the Prince of Darkness and way more like a mid-tier real estate agent who just made neo-noir his entire personality. And honestly, this highlights a major, hilarious critique of the book. James Carter might just be the most agreeable, hard-boiled detective in the history of the genre. I mean, just look at this list of cases he blindly accepts. Woodland walks in with an impossible devil manuscript that rewrites history. Yep, case accepted. Miss Finch, this librarian who acts as the author's surrogate, warns him a book is literally thinking. He just takes notes. A mental patient tells him he's already dead, and a young woman explains her reality is dissolving. Sure, case accepted. Our sources joke that Carter literally has zero professional code. Like, no premise is too cosmological, no client is too ontologically dubious as long as they pay him in deep philosophical concepts. So the thesis really drops in Chapter 3 with a character named Dr. Harlan Jessup. The text describes this guy as looking like something that had survived its own autopsy. Jessup just flat out states the book's entire premise to Carter, warning him about this machine and an editorial board rewriting reality. The authors fully lean into the absolute oldest philosophical thriller trope in the book. The crazy person in the mental hospital is the only sane one who actually knows the truth. They knew it was a massive cliche, and they just committed to it 100% anyway. Moving on to Section 3, the anti-narrative countertext, the antithesis. All right, let's slow things down a bit, because here is where the authors go fully unapologetically postmodern. The shadow author, Anti-Penix LVR, totally takes over just to undermine the thriller. And the source material really marvels at the chaotic absurdity here. I mean, it features an orientation pamphlet just to explain its own deconstruction. It explicitly tells the reader the margin is more important than the page, while giving us footnotes that are literally longer than the main text. Think about that. The authors wrote a book, then wrote a negative review of their own book inside the book, and made that review 40% of the total word count. Absolutely unhinged. So how do we map out this chaos? Well, to organize the absurdity, the authors just couldn't resist creating a glossary of terms that don't mean anything. Take ontological humility, for example, the degree to which existence is negotiable. I mean, the sources point out the hilarious irony here. They set out to write this fragmented, chaotic, anti-narrative, right? But they couldn't help themselves. Even as literary anarchists, they still showed up with a meticulously organized filing system. Oh, and here's another absolute gem from that fake glossary. Certainty fatigue. What happens when you're forced to be sure about something you should be doubtful about? This is just brilliant. It perfectly roasts the over-intellectualization of their own narrative. It's kind of like a winking apology to the reader for all the exhausting mental gymnastics they are forcing you to do just to keep up with the plot. But wait, it doesn't stop at glossaries. They also created an entire fake bibliography of books that don't even exist. One entry is described as being written in the conditional perfect unreal tense. What is that? Well, it's a grammatical tense they completely invented from scratch, taking the form would have been will be. You guys, they invented a fake tense, defined it in a fake grammar section, purely to use it as a descriptor for a non-existent book. That is an astonishing level of internal world building devoted entirely to things that aren't real. And as a key part of this deconstruction, the sources expose the author's lazy, and I mean really lazy crutch for mystical significance. The number 17. Seriously, the ledger has 17 conflicting historical documents. Carter has 17 different biographical details. There are 17 characters completely uncertain about their reality in footnote 4 alone. At some point, the number 17 stopped being a meaningful pattern and just became the big red button the authors smashed whenever they wanted something to feel cosmic and significant. Finally, Section 4, the beautiful residue, the synthesis. Okay, so in the grand finale of the thriller half, Detective Carter smashes the reality rewriting machine, and as one source perfectly puts it, he smashes it like it personally owed him child support. So, reality becomes fixed. Whirland, the devil, is edited completely out of existence. But wait, Carter asks for a drink, and suddenly a bottle of expensive amber liquid magically appears, tasting like smoke and starlight and the end of stories. The authors literally ended a terrifying cosmological plot with romantic cocktail notes. They violated their own plot mechanics, giving an erased devil a posthumous errand to restock the minibar just because they couldn't resist a really cool cinematic image. Now here is where it gets really meta. The authors realized that Chapter 17 totally ruined their satisfying ending, right? So what do? They deleted it. But because they are pathologically obsessed with meta-commentary, they turned around and published an appendix explaining exactly what was in the deleted chapter. It turns out destroying the machine didn't end the reality revisions. It just made them automatic and totalitarian. So they managed to delete their text to preserve the happy ending while forcing the reader to consume the depressing truth of it anyway. They ate the cake, they kept the cake, and then they wrote a whole essay about the cake. And to really hammer home this lack of resolution, they invented a brand new punctuation mark, the uncertainty point. It's a period stacked right on top of a question mark. It basically hovers somewhere between a statement and a question, like, Carter existed? It forces every single sentence to feel provisional, floating, and totally unresolved. The sources note it's a devastatingly perfect joke that works brilliantly, even if the authors themselves admit they kind of overused it by the end. So what does this all mean? Why does any of this matter? Well, as one of our sources perfectly summarizes, this is not literature. This is self-own as art form. This whole book is a hilarious, exhausting warning about narrative addiction. It pulls back the curtain on how heavily constructed our favorite stories actually are, how much we desperately rely on tropes, and how completely absurd it is when we try to force absolute chaos into a neat little 3-act structure. It roasts our human need for stories, while, ironically, delivering an incredibly stylish one. I want to leave you with a final brilliant provocation from the very end of the book. You see, the authors don't give you a neat conclusion. Instead, they hand you a multiple-choice apocalypse. The instructions literally tell the reader to pick the time frame that makes them the most uncomfortable. So I'm passing that challenge right on to you. 30 seconds? 3 hours? 17 years? Or never? Which impending erasure makes you squirm the most? Because in the world of the Devil's Ledger, the reality that makes you the most uncomfortable is almost always the accurate one. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and remember, keep questioning your realities.